This is the Storyworks Roundtable, where we have conversations about craft. Because becoming a successful author begins with writing a great story. Hello and welcome to this week's Storyworks Roundtable. Today, Catherine, Robert, and I are going to address some questions that have come up in the Storyworks Writers Facebook group. They're all related to point of view and narrative, and we have done whole shows on point of view and narrative topics, so we will link to those in the show notes. So if you want more information, go to storyworkspodcast.com, check out the show notes. We'll link to those episodes. Today we're going to address these questions in brief and recaps, maybe with fresh perspective, because it's a new day for all of us.
Right.
Yes, so all right. One of the questions was, how do you prevent readers from skipping point of view chapters, a specific point of view characters, chapters when you've got multiple POVs? Or how do you create equally weighted, equally interesting point of view characters? So would either of you like to start to take the lead on that question?
Sure, yeah. It's a challenging issue, isn't it, with an ensemble cast especially. And I've just been going through that, rereading the Expanse series, just because I felt like studying some sci-fi, epic sci-fi again. And that doesn't have a lot of POVs to start with, but the longer it goes on, the more you get, which is fairly typical of epic series. And you get disappointed. You get sort of, no, I want to follow Holden. I don't want to follow this dude. And it comes down to the writer's skill in deftly establishing a want and a need for the character as ASAP, something that we can empathize with. Let's make it a bit more trite, like the Blake Snyder's Save the Cat. You've got to have something where you have to attach to them pretty quickly. It's tricky if they're now the antagonist that you're following, and that's because that sometimes happens where we follow antagonists and see a different side of them, and that's why we've always said the antagonist has to be the star of their own show. So you've also got to find ways to attach a reader, but it's all about the attachment to me, and the faster you can do that. It's very tricky if you've just left the reader on a cliffhanger, on a big emotional moment with the previous POV character, and then you're switching. There's definitely a letdown moment. So it's all about how quickly can you reestablish the threads that you left that last one on, that you're revisiting, or if it's the very first time that we're with this new character, that I think is the most challenging. And that's when you've got to get an inciting incident, needs and wants, and some empathy in all within about the first paragraph. So there you go. Not much of a challenge.
Not much. No, but this is a question, I think, for every genre. Like if you're writing a romance and you've only got 2 points of view, his and hers, you're still switching, and then it might all be one storyline. So then you're looking at different issues, like what you just covered, Robert, might apply to fantasy and science fiction, especially where you have the chorus cast of characters. But when you've got any multiple point of view story, it's about making each point of view character as engaging as the other ones. I think the only reason for a reader to skip a point of view storyline is because they aren't caring enough, right?
Yeah.
They just don't care about that character.
Part of it for me also, because I am the queen of I will skip that POV. I just don't care. Is
she's talking to you, George.
Sorry. Do I believe that this point of view that I am now reading and the plot line that they are carrying me on is going to have an integral impact, right? Intersection that matters to me with the main plot that I'm already invested in. So if there's no connection and I don't see how it's going to come together and I just feel like it's skippable, I skip it because I don't care. So I got to have the connection with the character, but I also have to understand how this relates in the bigger scheme. I know that this is going to come together, and I'm expectant that the author's going to make it awesome, right?
Mm-hmm.
And if I don't know exactly how in the first half or even 3/4 of the book, and they may not come together until the very, very end, like that's okay.
Right.
As long as I can kind of start pulling those threads and say, ooh, like this will be really cool when this happens, or this might happen, etc. I got to have how those are going to line up.
Right. So it's not enough to have parallel storylines. You need to have interconnecting storylines. Even if it doesn't all solidify until the very end, you need to start seeing relationships between
Otherwise,
elements.
why am I not just reading 2 books?
Right.
That's my biggest pet peeve is why isn't this just a separate book following this character?
Yeah.
I think you're absolutely right there. Yeah, there's having read an awful lot of synopsis for stories, I would say that you can pretty easily pick when it's going to be a tricky story for readers, when a new writer has probably lacked some developmental editing and has thought that what would be most exciting is these entirely parallel stories that never cross until this massive climax at the end. And unfortunately, as you pointed out, Catherine, if you can't see any relationship, even if you can't guess at it, it's not exciting. What's exciting is if you're getting the dramatic irony because you know things that the other character doesn't know. And so I think that's where it plays out best, is when you're getting into the reader's head about how is this going to work out, or this is not going to end well, is it? And so you're right, it has to be able to pose questions as well as attaching very fast and not making it boring. You've got to have a reason to think that character's going to make an impact on the story.
Right, exactly. And I just read, actually, I decided to go ahead and read a Jack Reacher novel. Thank you, Robert. And I just read a Jack Reacher novel that we were talking about. This is genre, doesn't matter. Any genre has this issue, right? And Jack Reacher is on this plot line, and this other young couple is on this plot line. But you just know, as he's doing his investigation that has nothing to do with them, you just know it's about to happen, and you're just seeing it coming together, and he's going 2 steps this way and you're going, go, 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 save them. And then he goes 2 steps that way and you're going, no, don't do it. But like the point of view switches, I was totally in it because I could see how it was eventually going to come together. So yeah, you can do this in any genre.
And while you're on that point, actually, for lead child, that's a really interesting thing, because some of the books are first person and some of them are third person. And somebody asked him once, why is it inconsistent? And he said, it's not inconsistent. It's consistent with whatever the story needs. And I thought that was a really nice answer. It's okay. Do I need the world to be only seen through Reacher's eyes for this story to carry forward, or do I need some parallel with dramatic irony with other characters because we want to see how this is playing out from different perspectives, and it creates more tension. Right. And while we were talking as well, I thought about you were talking about romances. Alida, one of my all-time favourite books is it's a YA book, but it's superbly written. It's called All the Bright Places by Jennifer Niven. Yes, I know.
I just wept.
Oh God, that's a tearjerker. It's so beautiful because they're both first-person present tense, I think, from memory. I know, but definitely both first-person, and yet you are absolutely clear who you're reading. There's no doubt about it. It is really, really well done. It would be my masterwork for a dual POV first-person love story, highly recommended. So I suppose So coming back to that, what does that matter to people listening? Because the voice touches you, I think. So remembering, if we're coming into narrative, maybe that's a segue into it, that if the POV changes but the writing style doesn't change, well, writing style is the wrong thing, the voice of that character just seems the same as the voice of the previous character, that's when I drop out. That's just, I lose interest. Okay, it's just another version of this dude, and it's not interesting.
Right. right. Your narrative, an authorial narrative, not a first-person narrative, should be consistent throughout an entire book or series, but each point of view character should have a distinct perspective and voice that shifts the narrative, whether it's first person or third person. So if your point of view characters seem the same, you've got to change one of them. You've got to develop them into equally unique individuals. And if you can't do that, you should cut a point of view and just have a single point of view story.
See, there you go. There's a succinct answer from the professional. Why listen to us rambling on when Alita can just tell you how it is?
So then, Alita, to hit another question in the Facebook group.
Okay.
What happens if you have to cut a point of view? How do you do that?
You roll up your sleeves. You you grab your favorite headache medicine, be that a glass of wine or
cry a little,
get the box of tissues.
More in the point of view character.
Yeah. I mean, honestly, if you've got to take out, so we aren't talking, the question was not about changing a point of view, like from third to first. It's like I've got 2 POV characters or 5 or whatever, and I need to take one out of the story. So I would get out my storyboarding tool and I would take the document that shows me what I've got now, what each chapter contains, scene by scene, and then I would create a new one. So as I pull out that point of view character's material, I would say, what did I reveal in this point of view? We'll call it POV-A chapter that I now need to reveal through different points of view. Where can it go? Where does this fit in the plot? How is it going to be revealed effectively to the other characters and the readers? And just look for the holes it's creating. And also look for the ways you're strengthening your manuscript by getting rid of it. So it isn't just a lot of work, but it's a process of exciting creation. Try to go back to some of the fun of writing the story. So it isn't just, oh no, I've got to do this extraction process. But yeah, be meticulous. You just have to watch. It's like if you sew, it's like picking stitches that are all knotted up after your needle broke and you're in there and you're trying not to rip the fabric threads, but just get those get the stitches out and maybe you've got blue thread on blue fabric. So you're really being careful with it. It's that process. And then you're going to have to rewrite scenes. You cannot piecework, patch stuff back together. So if you take out something in POV-A that now has to be revealed in POV-C, you're going to have to rewrite that scene because it's a new perspective lens. It's a new process of discovery. It's a new experience, not only for the characters, but also for the readers. So it's an overhaul.
It's definitely work, yeah. I mean, one of the other things is that you could actually be giving yourself a pat on the back for having recognised that a POV character's got to go because the story is being let down by it. So presumably some of that cutting room floor stuff will be relatively easy. So you could go through and, cut the low-hanging fruit. Maybe there are things in there where it's just shoe leather and it didn't really add much to the story. And in fact, you don't even really need to rewrite much of a scene because it's irrelevant. So there is that.
Right.
The other thing you could do is, this is why I really like Scrivener, because in Scrivener I code all the POVs if I'm writing multiple POV, which I'm not at the moment, but I have done in the past. And that's really handy because you can create a collection in Scrivener that's all the scenes that are only from that POV, and you can read them through as one arc, which I really like. You could do that, read them through as one arc, whether you've got it in Scrivener or not, and just, as Alita said, pull those out and notice what conflict you're experiencing through that. Why did you put that conflict in? does that still need to exist in the story? Is it there for a specific complication to the plot, or is it irrelevant? And that might help you distill it, boil it down into how you can rewrite the scenes that need to be rewritten in a more powerful way, because you can amp the conflict up because it's now maybe from the main character's point of view. So I think some of the things actually are, as you say, it's painstaking work, but in the same way that maybe, cabinetry and making a beautiful chest of drawers is painstaking work, it is part of the craft. And you can learn a lot from that as well. Maybe you also learn how not to have to do that in the future, because you've accidentally brought in a character too strongly, when a better understanding of craft would have said, okay, this is where I can really throw a big complication at the main character, as opposed to try and introduce that by having a sidekick or a supporting character. I don't know if that makes sense.
No, it does, and that's kind of the best case scenarios, that you assess this character and you say, this is extraneous, this is ruining my tension, this is taking moments away from my protagonist or more important supporting characters. And then you have a much easier job of doing the extraction and rebuilding your plot line and your tension for the rest of the story. The worst case scenario is that you've got your picker and you're going at the blue thread on the blue fabric. And so
if that point of view character also appears in every single one of the main characters' scenes, where it's from their point of view, then you've got a story to rewrite. There's no point in trying to unpick that. It's like trying to unravel a sweater so you can re-knit it. What's the point?
Yeah, and I think what you said, Robert, about, or Catherine, whichever one of you said, and you learn not to do this again, right? Robert, yes, yay. Yeah, exactly. You say, okay, now I've got all this work in front of me, but look at how much I'm learning from the process. Absolutely. Yes.
What's our next question?
What is our next question? How do we switch from our narrator to our character's point of view?
They're the same.
Short answer is just do it. We've used this analogy before. It's the point of view character is the fish, and the narrative is the water the fish is swimming in. And as readers, it's all invisible to us. We're in the water with the fish, right? We enter the world, and the fish is our vehicle through that world. So we're not really any more aware of the narrative voice than our point of view character is, right? Because we are just taking in the story, and that's the beauty of well-written fiction. But I think that's also why so many writers get tripped up over it, because we aren't trained to distinguish narrative from point of view character as readers. And so when you start to assess it in your own work, it can become confusing. But if you just think of everything you describe is narrative, right? You are the storyteller. So everything that is not dialogue or like very simple action on the stage of the page is your narrative. So when you describe the setting, that's narrative. When you tell us what somebody's body language is, that's narrative. If you are writing in third person instead of first, it's easier to see that distinction because you've got the authorial voice, the voice of the invisible storyteller, and then you've got the perspective of the character. So you can create a separation, between how your character thinks and talks and the storyteller's voice, the narrative voice. If you're in first person, the lines blur more because the narrative voice is the protagonist's voice. But you need a first person narrator who is a competent narrator, who can do description, who can do scene setting, who can create mood, who can build a world, who can describe what the other characters in the scene are doing. Right? So you need a competent narrator, whatever your point of view is, first, third, second even. But yeah. As far as how to switch, you're doing it all the time. You know, grab a highlighter and start marking, where am I in narrative? Where am I in my character's point of view? So you start training yourself to see when you switch. And I think once you see it, you'll say, oh, okay, there it is. I do it. Right?
Another way to think about it, I agree. It's you're doing it anyway. You can't not. It's you cannot write a story without narrating it. So it's already happening. So trying to be overly conscious about it certainly while you're in drafting stage, I think is pointless. When you come back and edit, I've noticed there are times where something has felt abrupt, and that's usually a clue to me that could be one of the issues where I've gone all explainy, or there's too much exposition, and so it's relying heavily on the narrator as opposed to the old show don't tell, or just getting into the action more quickly. You do notice it, I think, sometimes in some of the classic sci-fi is like that, where each chapter will begin with a sort of a bit of a descriptor of what's happening, and then you get into the third person character's point of view. So for example, for centuries the Eldred had put up with the oppression that the Morgels had enforced upon them, but ever since the breakup of society on planet X, things have become more fractious. And it was only now that Smith found himself confronting the realities of this. So, you've gone from a big picture of, exactly. So for those who are listening, Catherine just sort of described the funnel. And when I've taught people how to structure nonfiction or how to structure presentations, one of the things we talk about is the ability to move effortlessly between conceptual and concrete, and I'm indicating this funnel shape again. So you can go from big picture to detail, and I think one of if you go and read some of the masterworks, you'll notice the narration will often do that for us. It'll take us out to setting, but we won't be there very long before we've gone back down into the detail with the character again. So that's one tool. It's not the way to do it, but it's one way to think about it. If you're spending a lot of time in the big picture, then you've probably gone authorial, and you may need to do that. Maybe you're omniscient and that's what you want, but that's one way to start thinking about how is this playing out in my story anyway. I found it difficult with first person, actually, I must admit. With first person present tense, I get to the point where, but how do I explain what's going on? You've got to find ways that your character can notice that, or can have some internal monologue, or they have a sidekick who asks them a question so that they can reply to it. There's all sorts of little tricks in there to try and get the narration in without it making seem like all of a sudden the character has broken the fourth wall and is now starting to explain to the reader what's going on.
Right.
Whereas in reality, you sort of do need that from time to time to explain to the reader what's going on.
Yeah, you do. I think so. Thinking specifically about transitioning from narrative to point of view character, maybe where the question comes from is the writer isn't sure about that transition. But if you think of that process you were describing, Robert, with the funnel, it's as simple as the narrator, will stick with the beginning of the scene. So we've got sort of here's where we are, that establishing shot, and then we show our protagonist in that setting, and we show what the protagonist is doing, and maybe we come down into a specific element of that activity or body language, or maybe we even drop right into the protagonist's head, and we give that perception piece. Maybe it's a thought, maybe it's an attitude, maybe it's a bodily feeling or something, and then we're in that point of view. So the transition is, a process of bringing the reader's awareness from the world around into the character. And that can be as simple as showing us what the character is doing and then dropping into some action or dialogue, or going into the perspective lens, the attitude, the emotion, the thought, right? So,
Definitely.
All right.
I think it's a tricky one with that as well, because we're used to movies, and movies are so good at establishing, by their very nature, the visual setting establishes exposition. So, and establishes setting, whereas we have to kind of find a way to if it's a really busy city and there's danger on the streets, you can establish that in seconds in a movie. But how do you explain that in first person present tense for a character who's suddenly fresh out off of a plane into a new city and doesn't understand all of that? So I can see why a new writer gets trapped in that I've got to explain all of this, and so that brings me into being a narrator, but I'm slowing everything down, and there's an art to it for sure.
Mm-hmm.
Or am I breaking my point of view because I'm first person present tense, but I'm explaining stuff? Like, did I just ruin everything?
Right.
Mm-hmm.
So,
Mm-hmm.
as you said, the best advice is probably just to do it and then come back, and it's much easier to see, I think, in hindsight.
Mm-hmm. Right. And, if you are really having trouble handling a first-person narrator, switch to a third. Play with both, see what's most effective for that story, but we have multiple choices to make when we craft a story. So, if the narrative POV character issue is really difficult, switch it up. Write a scene in various points of view with various narrative experiments, and then see what works best, and make sure you work some of those transitional moments into your experimental scene. Give us some scene setting description, give us some dialogue, give us some interiority where we go inside that character's perspective with attitude, physicality, and emotion, All right. One more question? Right?
I think we've kind of already
Did we do all
addressed it.
Four? Yeah, I think we did. I think two of them
Yeah.
rolled together.
Yeah.
All right. Thank you for listening to the Storyworks Roundtable. Find all our shows, show notes, and videos at storyworkspodcast.com.